Do we operate on faith? Boy, I operate on faith every time I push the throttle forward and then ease back on the stick to take off. There's an element of faith there that the engine's going to work, that the airplane is going to be lifted up because that's what nature, the universe, God created. There is such order in the midst of the chaos that we create here on Earth as human beings. There's still a lot of order in the Earth, in the world, and in the universe.
Disinformation is spreading.
There will be a surprise outbreak. Is the issue of pandemic.
No social distancing at all.
They said that they would express their concerns about the mask supply.
Where's the mask? Where's the glove?
A second wave is
we all need some good news.
This is a message for all the healthcare workers out there.
Thank you.
If you're looking for hope tonight, raise your hand. If you feel alone and don't understand, if you're fighting the fight of your life, then stand.
From Santa Rosa, California, this is 19 Stories. I'm Cheryl Halling. If the voice of the guest joining me today sounds familiar, it's because since the early 2000s, Rob Reider has been the most sought-after airshow announcer in the U.S. and is the recipient of the International Council of AirShows Sword of Excellence, the highest award an airshow professional can receive. As a pilot, Rob has applied his knowledge of flying. As the host of the podcast, I learned about flying from that, which is the audio version of the most widely read column in the 97-year history of Flying magazine. The podcast currently has well over 250,000 downloads since it debuted in December of 2020. Rob has also been the voice for Sporty's Pilot Shop Learn to Fly e-learning video series since 1987, the most widely used pilot training program on the planet. Drawing from both his acting chops, which began in high school and continued in musical theater at the University of Cincinnati's College-Conservatory of Music, Rob brings his announcing skills to the world of audiobooks and specializes in thrillers and nonfiction genres. His extensive knowledge of aviation and the military has attracted the attention of authors who need his expertise and experience to bring their words to life. Rob is also the owner and founder of Fifth Force Productions and has enjoyed a 13-year television career in the Midwest and has 5 regional Emmys to show for it. Add to that, he's an accomplished guitarist, and we have a very intriguing man to chat with. Rob Reider, welcome to 19 Stories.
Cheryl, thank you very much. When I look back on what I've done and somebody compresses it like you just did, I think, wow, that was a lot to do. And I feel like I'm just getting started in the voice business, though.
And that's okay, and we'll talk about it. But I would say to have the kind of career you've had in announcing, that is a different form of voice work. One of the things I really love when people hear their intro, because you and I both being in podcasting, they say never have an intro that's past, 15, 30 seconds. And yet it is about my guests. And when my guests hear their history, like you said, compressed like that, it gives them kind of a quick retrospective of, oh, I did these things.
Well, I am a blessed guy for sure to have been able to do all these things and still be upright and learning and vital and still able to do push-ups and stuff like that. So,
Rob, welcome aboard
Thank
Flight
you.
19. I hope this episode is a pleasant one for you. And prior to takeoff, if you can please just make sure your seatbelt is fastened, your tray table is upright position, and note that in the event of a crash landing, your seat can be used as a flotation device.
Thank you so much. It's I don't know how many times I've heard that over the years, as much as I've traveled via commercial airlines, but it's one of those things that it's important, I guess, but I think I pretty much have it memorized, as you do.
I just thought, how apropos, a pilot. When do I ever get to say that to a guest? So how are you doing today?
I am doing exceptionally well. I just finished the intros and outros and commercials for one of my I Learned About Flying from That episodes. And later on this evening, perhaps I will be doing a final mix on it and mastering it for editorial review at Flying Magazine. And tomorrow I'll work on another one. So it's good. And then I am waiting to hear clearance from an author for the 15-minute checkpoint. And once he gives me that, I'm going to race through his book, not race through, but get onto his book right away so I can have it done here in the next week or so, and then 2 more books right after that. And interestingly, these are all independent authors. I've only done one book for a publisher at this point.
There's so much to chat with you, and I definitely want to get into your audiobooks, but if you wouldn't mind telling us where you're located in the country, where are you joining me from?
I'm in the Queen City of Cincinnati, Ohio, just outside of Cincinnati in a small suburb called Loveland, Ohio. And it is a very, very good place to be from. I have been in Cincinnati since I started college here back in 1968. I'm an old guy.
You're dating yourself, Rob. Now, where are you originally from?
Originally York, Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
Which for 4 days at one point was actually the capital of the United States.
What?
Yeah, York, Pennsylvania. Just about an
heard that.
hour from Baltimore, a little more than that. But just 4 days.
How did that happen?
I don't know. Probably it was an accident. I don't know. Somebody
They went, nope, not here.
Wrong email address or something like that. But that was way, way back. But I don't recall the story surrounding how that happened. But it happened, and that's Pennsylvania.
The rest is history.
Yeah, my family moved to Columbus back in 1956, I believe, and I stayed in Columbus through most of my elementary school and all of high school, and then after that, went to a prep school up in Massachusetts, Deerfield Academy, for a year following family tradition, and then toured with a musical group that few people, unless they're my age or older, have heard of, and that's Fred Waring and the Pennsylvanians, a musical group of, when I was touring with them, 16 singers and 17 singers, 16 in the band, and we toured the country on a bus doing one-nighters, and I learned a great deal about performing.
I would imagine you did.
I was 19.
What a great way to just get a training on what it takes to be in show business. I mean, to do one-nighters with that large of a group. And now, were you all former Pennsylvanians, i.e. the name?
No, not necessarily. People came from all over the country. Fred Waring started his group back in 1922 when he was at Penn State, and it grew during the last days of vaudeville and early days and through the days of radio and in the early days of television was a huge, huge influence. They said that Fred Waring was the guy that taught America to sing. Great choral music from him and his organization. And I was blessed and honored to be a part of that. As you say, one-nighters teaches you how to get along with people, teaches you how to keep your voice going. And we could eat anything and drink anything. Somebody
at 19, yeah.
No, I said, don't drink milk before you go on. Baloney. We were singing 2 hours a night, 6 nights a week, sometimes 7.
That's phenomenal.
So it was exciting, and it was good.
Appreciate you giving a little bit of the history because there's so much to talk to you about. And mention in your intro that you began your career in air shows, as an announcer in the 2000s. But you began in 1979 as a volunteer and then worked your way into a paid position as an on-air show announcer with what I understand over 300 shows under your belt. And so curious what piqued your interest to volunteer your time at air shows and what you did during those years volunteering prior to becoming the most sought-after air show announcer in the country.
Cheryl, it started because after I was done with Fred Waring and the Pennsylvanians, I went to the University of Cincinnati as a broadcasting major at the College-Conservatory of Music. That was 1968. I wound up singing on television in Cincinnati on a talk variety program called The Bob Braun Show, and also wrote music for the company as they were developing young people specials that were syndicated around the world. And between those two endeavors during the 13 years that I was there, it's when I won my Emmys. But the show that I was on, we had an 8-piece band. I sang everything from John Denver to show tunes to Earth, Wind, and Fire and standards. And we took the show to what was then the Dayton Airfair in 1978. And my love of aviation was just peaked at that because when after the war, my dad soloed in an airplane but couldn't get his private pilot's license because of color blindness. But we built model airplanes, and he took me to the Air Force Museum in Dayton. And so aviation was in the blood. And when I had the opportunity to start volunteering then after that, the next year at the Dayton show, I had already had 8-9 years under my belt as an on-air personality in Cincinnati that was also carried in Dayton, Columbus, and Indianapolis. 5 days a week, no net live. And so they started giving me a little mic time, and it moved on from there. They started paying me a little bit. I joined the International Council of AirShows in 1995. and then went full-time in 2006. And it's been since 2006 that I've done over 300 airshow locations.
And you mentioned about being without a net on television for 6 days a week. And that kind of training, it doesn't exist anymore, which is kind of sad. I mean, I grew up watching live television, and, the things that are so precious about watching reruns of live television is the ad lib that happened, the camaraderie of people really pulling together because, like you say, you were without a net. And I have a later question for you regarding that because of what it means to be in the moment when you fly. But I understand that you fly your experimental plane, Vans RV-7A, to 75% of your air shows that you announce. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do. And they say it's experimental, but there are 11,000 of them flying around the world of the different RV series. So, and it's all set up. It's kind of like an airliner. I can take off, engage the autopilot at 600 feet and not touch the stick again until I'm 200 feet above the ground. It's that automated. But the airplane has been a wonderful tool, and it is so economical that I've been able to fly it less expensively in many cases than going on the airlines. And if my wife Jill wants to go with me, it's definitely cheaper than flying on the airlines. And we're good for any place easily east of the Mississippi, although I've flown it twice out to Yuma, Arizona. That's a 12-hour each-way flight. So it takes a little time. But I love flying the plane. Flying an airplane, there's a sense of freedom and a sense of accomplishment that exists for me when I fly that I get pretty much no place else.
I have to say, I almost wish I knew how to fly because given how much the experience of traveling via commercial airlines has pretty much taken the joy out of traveling, at least it has for me, I would imagine, like you say, not only is it economical, but gives you a sense of control that you don't have flying commercially. And you mentioned that, there's a lot of these particular planes flying, but when I first heard experimental, to me, it was analogous to a practicing doctor. So they're kind of oxymorons. So can you explain really what an experimental aircraft is?
You bet. The experimental class of aircraft are basically airplanes that a person will build either from scratch or from a kit. I am the third owner of the airplane that I've got, but a guy in, I believe, North Carolina built it back in 2006 and 7. Then it was sold then to a guy in Scottsdale, Arizona. And when he decided to sell it, it showed up for sale. And a friend of mine had his eyes open for me and found it, said, "You better put some money down on this airplane. It looks good." And he and I went to Scottsdale. He inspected it. He test flew it because he had built 10 of them in his life. And it was good. We flew it back, and he put all the aviation electronics suite in it that makes it so joyful to fly and so easy to fly and so safe to fly. It goes about 180 miles an hour. On about,
sweet.
7.8 gallons an hour. I get about 20 to 23 nautical miles to the gallon of gas. It's pretty inexpensive. No flight attendants, but what the heck?
Well, it sounds like it's a pretty personal plane. It doesn't sound like you have much room, or how many does it seat?
This airplane, this particular Vans RV-7A, that's a 2-seat side-by-side model. And it's 2 people at 180 pounds apiece and about 100 pounds worth of bags. And that's it. And my wife is considerably less than 180. So she weighs in at, I think, about 111 pounds. But we enjoy flying it so much. It's so nice. We get places so much quicker than we would if we were going by car or even by a commercial air travel because the stops that you have to make and the clearance.
Don't get me started on that, Rob. No, seriously. I live in Sonoma County, as you know, in Santa Rosa. We have a local airport that is literally, an hour and change, maybe an hour and a half at the most to fly from here to Los Angeles or to Vegas or even maybe a couple hours to go to Denver. But the way that the airlines have restructured to, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you'd be the perfect person to ask this, it seems like so many airlines are making up, and I'm digressing because I really want to talk about you, but they're making up for all the lost revenue from the pandemic because in order for me to get to looking at their flight pattern, go to Seattle, then go down to Los Angeles, then come back to San Francisco, and then go to to Las Vegas. I looked at that the other day. I said, it was over a 12-hour flight to go an hour and a half. And I just thought there's something terribly wrong with that. So maybe that's a whole other episode. We just talk about airlines.
I'm not sure I even know how to speak to that, except that I've experienced sometimes 3-legged flights when I could get there in one, unless I travel at 6 a.m. So it's not all that fun anymore to travel by commercial airlines. It's cattle call.
So when you say you enjoy flying, I can hear it because you have that freedom and control. And I want to talk about something that you announced. We had a little chitty chat about a week ago prior to you joining me today. And you mentioned that on July 4th, 2020, you were the voice of the Salute to America military flyover at the White House. And you were on worldwide television, of course, for about 35 minutes.
Yeah.
And I understand you had to ad-lib quite a bit because, as you say, the TV guys knew nothing about planes. So you shared with us, actually, just a few moments ago, where your knowledge of aircraft stems from, but much in the way that consultants who have expertise in one area consult filmmakers when they're doing maybe a period piece. Are you also hired to kind of be the consultant, whether it's for a flyover or one of your air shows? Like, you obviously know if you're given a script and you look at the script versus the plane, that something fits incongruous with what, they're asking you to say. Is that something they ask for your input on?
Well, at air shows, it's pretty well determined what is going to be flying at any given time, so that's not an issue. But it does become incumbent upon me to know enough about the pilot, about the plane, and about perhaps some of the maneuvers that are being flown by the pilot in that plane to be able to explain some of that to the audience in a way that doesn't leave them thinking, what the heck is that? My aviation knowledge is a combination of what I know as a pilot, what I've learned watching other pilots, what I've learned over the years reading, and then doing it a lot of times. As they say, repetition is the mother of skill. So that's where it comes from. In the case of that deal at the White House, at the rehearsal the night before, they didn't put the airplanes up because they can't clear the airspace over the White House unless there's an incredible amount of coordination. So it was a one and done deal. So the night before, they had a rehearsal, and I read the script as it was given to me. Actually, they gave me a bunch of stuff, and I rewrote about 85% of it. And I read the thing, and I put a clock on it, and I was done in 29 minutes and 59 seconds. And the producer stopped, and she said, "No, you're supposed to do 34 minutes. I said, "Ma'am, the airplanes aren't here. I don't have a clue what's going to happen tomorrow night." Because things seldom happen exactly as planned. There's always some flex. And as a matter of fact, I had told the people with White House Communications, I said, you guys have to understand that things will not generally happen as inked. And so this script I have, you have to allow me to depart from the script, and you're going to have to trust me. And they said yes. Well, turns out the night of the show, the planes were coming by, and some were faster and a little ahead, but the TV guys were putting up things that they didn't know a fighter from a bomber. So I was having to look at the big screens, kind of see if I could see out from under my tent to see what was happening and ad lib. And at the end, the producer said, "You ad lib pretty good." I said, "Thank you, ma'am."
I kind of know what I'm doing.
Yeah. But that's why I get hired. To be able to flex when it's not so much when things are going right as when things aren't going right. And sadly, I've had to announce for 7 people who have lost their lives at air shows.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you this later and mention this later, but since you brought that up, because I was thinking about, again, our little conversation that we had prior to us meeting today, and it left me with a question that, if you don't mind, I will ask you, and it pertains to the November 11th of this year, 2022. You were announcing for Wings Over Dallas Air Show when 2 World War II era aircraft, B-17 Flying Fortress and a Bell B-63 King Cobra, collided midair and crashed during the show at Dallas Executive Airport in Dallas, Texas.
Actually, I was not there, Cheryl.
You weren't?
No,
I thought you were.
No,
I thought that was something you witnessed.
The guy who was announcing ended up using a document that I had developed years ago as to what to say when something like that happens.
Got it. Okay.
And the B-17 and the P-63, we don't know what's going on. There's some people who have begun to speculate on Facebook, and I chided a couple of people seriously. I said, don't even think you have any idea what's going on. One guy said it's an obvious case of pilot error. Maybe, but we don't know whether there was a medical. I've watched a guy die who had a medical issue who never appeared to have lost control of the airplane until it dived into the ground with the wings level. So it's very, very improper and disrespectful in my estimation to speculate on what happened in a fatal crash and a fatality. It's really, you have to compartmentalize big time in order to get the information out to the spectators, to those who are attending to, so they can look after their kids and they can get their kids turned away and they don't get in the way of somebody that might be on the way to help, and to stay off cell phones, so those who need those channels of communication can get calls through. Because at an air show, bandwidth for the cellular business goes right down the dumper. Get 100,000 people someplace, and it's difficult to get calls out and in. So there's some of the things that we talk about when something happens. But to have known more than just as acquaintances two of the people who died in that collision at Dallas was heartbreaking. One of the guys lived only about 90 miles from me. Another guy I had known through another group he's involved with, and this particular event at which he was flying when he was in the P-63 and sliced that B-17 in half. It was child's play for him for the kind of stuff that he normally does. So that's why it's difficult for me to say ultimately it was pilot error. I just don't know.
Sounds like no one does. I mean, how can you unless you were on board? At least that's what I'm hearing you say. And, you touched upon people judging, and they go by their educated guess, and professionals such as yourself can look at that, and you would probably be more rightfully inclined to make a judgment about it. But first of all, my heartfelt sympathies to the families and friends of these pilots. If anybody is listening that was connected to that like you were. And,
thank you. That's very kind.
As a spectator, if you will, seeing that on the news, it's sometimes we get immune to things that we see on TV because there's so much happening right now. But there's people's lives attached to this. And like you say, the children and families and all the things that you just mentioned that people don't think about, of having to get emergency crew there, having to deal with a catastrophe in real time and deal with the emotion and reality of what's happened. And you did mention to me that there are 6 things to say when someone dies in an air show.
Yes.
Would you mind sharing what those things are?
Not at all. First thing I say, ladies and gentlemen, obviously something has happened that we haven't counted on. Here's what I need you to do. Number 1, don't try to help. We've got emergency personnel headed toward the scene right now. Number 2, moms and dads, please turn your kids away from the scene right now. That's something that they don't have to be looking at. Number 3, moms and dads, keep your heads on a swivel because some officials may have to move through the crowd. Number 4, please stay off your cell phones because those communication channels are going to be important for those who are responding to the scene and have to have that kind of communication. Number 5, we're obviously going to stop the show for a while. This is going to be a good time to look at some of the static display aircraft, get something to eat, get something to drink, and I will keep you apprised of what's going on over the sound system to let you know whether or not we will continue with the show. And number 6, if you have video, please bring that video to the announcer's stand so we can make a copy, because those images that you have may be helpful in an investigation. And then we play quiet music.
Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is a master of ceremonies. That's you taking control and allowing calm to prevail, to have cool heads prevail to deal with a situation. Is that something that you came up with?
It came, Cheryl, from when I was much newer in the business, I actually called up some of the leading announcers of the time and asked them, what do you guys say? What do you do when somebody crashes and it appears that that person has died? You know, it's difficult. And it was a compilation of about 4 of the big or 5 of the main announcers back in the late 90s when I came up with that. And the Air Force has adopted it. It's in some of their support manuals for their single ship demo teams. And I think the Navy has done it as well. But it's not mine, but it is something that I've loaned to other people. And the gentleman who was at Dallas used that and also another recording to let people know what to do and what not to do and how to deal with the tragedy that unfolded in a horrible way at Dallas. It was 3 seconds from the time they collided to the time they were all on the ground.
Oh,
gosh. There's no sugarcoating any of that. So
I wouldn't imagine you could, but what you just shared with me as far as really trying to take control of the crowd and instill a sense of order, and does it usually work? I mean,
it does.
It does. Okay.
It really does work because at that point they know I care because I've been talking to them all day. And as long as I'm not coming off like, ladies and gentlemen, do this, that doesn't.
Well, I don't sense you're like that anyway.
It does. That read doesn't work anymore, It's
Yeah, it's interesting that it ever did. But Rob, I imagine that as a pilot, you have a confidence that the average person doesn't, given that every time you get into a plane, you are truly living in the moment as really yours, your passengers, if you have them, your life depends on it. So do you personally have any fears about flying? And if you do, what skill sets you have learned to help you combat them when you come up against them?
I don't have any fear of flying anything, but I have chosen to fly over the last few years pretty much only my own plane. So I have gotten very good at handling my own airplane. I know guys who fly multiple planes and they are excellent at it, but they've been doing it way longer than I have. I've got a little over 2,000 hours and fully 25% of those hours have been in my own airplane. It's the first airplane I've ever owned, that Vans RV-7A. So I don't fear anything about flying. I make educated decisions as to when I should and should not fly based on what kind of weather there is going to be. My wife and I, we fly up to a place we have on an island off the coast of Maine, and we were coming back a few years ago, and we ended up having to spend 2 days in Schenectady, New York, because the weather would not allow us to go through that and get home safely. So we said, okay, we're stuck. There's no place we can go here. So that was it was something that was we fly with calculated risks, but we don't mess around with weather unless the weather is going to allow us through. But those 2 days in Schenectady were wonderful for us because we did it on points at a Marriott and enjoyed downtown Schenectady and our time just hanging out together. But weather, if there would be any kind of fear at all, Cheryl, it would be weather.
Do you think there's certain pilots, though, that would push through that and think based on how many hours they've flown and their expertise that they would do that? Or there was just a massive respect that weather and Mother Nature kind of rule the day?
Depends on the weather and the airplane. Some airplanes, you can go over top of it, you can get around them, you can go fast. But in an airplane like mine, I would not fly in the kind of weather that could jeopardize my life. Other guys can pick their way through things. I've picked my way through things, but I know as I look at that weather, I'll know that it's not that severe or it's going to be okay. We do this, we don't do that. I am legal to fly in the clouds, but I'm not going to fly into a thunderstorm, that's for sure.
I want to ask you, in one of the episodes of I Laughed, I learned about flying from that I was listening to, you talk about the fifth force, and that is the name of your production company. Can you share what the concept of the fifth force is?
Well, it doesn't really have so much to do with the podcast as it does to do with me as an airshow announcer. And it's something that I thought up when I first joined the International Council of AirShows and started taking out ads in the magazine and had a display at the booth. And it says, since Kitty Hawk, when the Wright brothers first flew their powered flight back on December 17th, 1903, since Kitty Hawk, there have been 4 forces that act upon an airplane in flight. Now there are 5: lift, weight, thrust, drag, and Rob Reider, air show announcer. It's a little ego thing there.
Okay.
But that's the 5th force. Yeah.
Okay.
So
I was thinking it was some deep psychological it's physiological thing.
Called branding.
It's called branding. No, I love it. I really, because, you touch upon weight and lift, and I think of the bumblebee. You look at a bumblebee.
Oh, my gosh.
Fat, furry little body and teeny tiny, just like paper-like wings. There's no rhyme or reason to it getting off the ground. And that's how I think of an airplane. And so when you said the 5th force, I thought, there's something new that's been discovered. But it's Rob. That's what's been discovered.
The other one that I have is out of his mind and into their dreams. And it's me holding one of my grandkids is the picture.
Oh, so. That's sweet. That's shout out to the grandkids.
Yeah.
What are your grandkids' names?
Oh, I got too many of them. Because,
really? Oh, okay.
Okay. I've been married.
Continue.
I've been married twice. My first wife passed away back in 2007. And I remarried in 2012. And the blended families have given my wife, Jill, and me now 22 grandkids. Don't ask for the names. I'm not going to.
No, that's okay.
We don't have time. I'd have to write them down.
That's okay.
Call me tomorrow.
I just thought we'd give them a shout out, but you know who you are, little grandkids.
They are. And I love them all on both sides. So.
Oh, at Christmas and birthdays. Oy. I mentioned in your intro that you have a background in acting, and you also have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Broadcasting and Electronic Media from the University of Cincinnati.
Yep.
College-Conservatory Music, which you mentioned as well. And you enjoyed 13 years in television, resulting in 5 Emmys, which we touched upon. How does one get 5 Emmys? What did you do?
The part of the deal has to do with the fact that Cincinnati, for years, was a bastion of local live television. And that also led to divisions of the company that did programming for young people, the young people's specials from multimedia broadcasting. And I wrote music for a number of those and voiced a number of those. So 4 of my 5 Emmys were for music that I wrote for these programs that were syndicated around the world. Those are 4. The 5th one was actually for on-air performance when I was working on the Bob Braun TV show. The first 2, I didn't even know I was going to get. I didn't even know I'd been nominated. And I was asked to go to the ceremony to drive from Cincinnati with some executives from the TV station to Columbus for this event. And all of a sudden, I'm standing there with 2 statues. I had no idea. I was so excited to be recognized by your peers, whether it be an Emmy or a SOVAS award or, an Audie award. They feel good. They get your recognition. And I do believe that kind of recognition begets more work, I think.
And I want to clarify, SOVAS, by the way, is Society of Voice Arts and Sciences, for those who are not familiar with what a SOVAS is. I do want to ask you then how, you've got all this incredible background in entertainment and announcing and aviation, and then you get into audiobooks, into thrillers.
Well,
do tell how that came about for you.
All right. Well, when I started doing voice work, I started back in early 2019. I thought, what am I going to do to back out of air shows before people say, why didn't he quit instead of why did he? And I wanted to kind of work toward a Johnny Carson to eventually bail out and stop and have some sort of remembrance by people to say, boy, he was good. We wish he hadn't quit. But I started looking for agents or coaches. And I thought, L.A., long way. New York, a long way. Chicago, not so bad. And I stumbled across a guy named Bill DeWeese, and Bill and I wound up communicating via email because I was going to drop some money on his coaching program. And I wanted to know who I was going to be dropping money with. Mm-hmm. And after about our 3rd exchange, he said, I know who you are, because he was from Central Ohio. One of the stations on which the show that I performed was carried was in Columbus. And
no way.
Yes. And so we've become fast friends, doing music stuff on the side. And so one of the things that he does in his marketing plan is talk about getting involved in as many different genres of voice work as you can. And one of those was audiobooks. And I did an ACX book that never got published and I never got paid. And I swore I'd never do another one. And my wife, Jill, says she rolled her eyes. She said, "Oh, yeah, right." Well, then one of my high school classmates posted on our Facebook page, our class Facebook page, that his second novel was coming out. And he's a retired Navy captain, a physician. And he said that it's about a crazed terrorist and dirty bombs. And I typed an email. I thought, I'll try this. "Got anybody to do the audiobook?" He said, "No, you want to try?" I said, "Yeah." And then he sent me a chapter. I read it. I played it for my two sons to see if they thought, who were avid audiobook listeners, to see if I was catching the vibe that would work. And they said yes. Sent it back to him. He liked it. His publisher liked it. So I'm doing 4 books for him.
Just like that.
Yeah. And then I started kind of mining, if you will, a talk show here in Cincinnati. And I know the host and I know the producer. And I said, "Let me know about Peter Bronson. How can I reach Peter Bronson?" And he told me, and I reached out because it was a book about a fire at a supper club here in northern Kentucky, just south of Cincinnati, that in 1977 Memorial Day weekend killed 165 people.
This is the nonfiction piece you're
This is the
referring to.
nonfiction
Okay.
piece.
All right.
That has fiction woven in to move the plot forward in terms of the chronology of how it all happened, because it goes back to 1936 when the club burned for the first time. And so anyway, that worked out. He's had me do 2 other books for people, and it's been good. And then I posted on LinkedIn that I had done this book, and a guy said, "Hey, I've done 6 novels. I don't like the narrator who did the first one. Are you interested?" He's an Air Force Academy graduate. He flew fighter pilots, F-16s, A-10s, and OV-10s. He has a doctorate from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and he's a consultant for the National Business Aircraft Association. He's written 6, so I'm waiting for approval on the 2nd to master it. I'm ready to read the 3rd, and I have pre-read the 4th. And they're all aviation stuff. And I did another one that I auditioned for off of ACX. The guy heard my samples after I updated my samples, because Hillary Huber is my audiobook coach. And Hillary has been very, very helpful. And I did my demos with her, and I uploaded those samples to ACX, and a guy heard them and asked me to audition. I won over 12 people, and I've done the first one for him, and it's up on Audible, as are about 6 or 7 of the other books. And it's just what I thought I would hate, Cheryl, I have come to absolutely love. And that's to sit in here in front of the same microphone I'm talking to you on, in this nice room that has been because of the assistance from Jim Edgar, he was the first podcast of yours I listened to. And it was delightful. And that's why I thought, you are so good, Cheryl, at what you do in terms of your interviews. That's why I reached out to you.
You're so kind. Thank you. You're very kind.
But anyway, Jim Edgar and Dan Leonard and George Whittam have all added their 2 cents worth to get me audio that I think is really good. And so I'm very happy with what I'm doing in the room, and I love my life. And now that the air show season is over, I've got about 4 months to really dig in, and the reaching out to publishers will begin here shortly.
First of all, thank you very much for your gracious compliment. And I want to, for the listeners who aren't familiar with some of these names, a lot of these, because we do have people outside of voiceover. And for my avid listeners, they'll know who Jim Edgar is. But a lot of who you mentioned are people who are well known within the voiceover world. But can you explain for, again, those who are not familiar with the verbiage, ACX, what exactly is that platform?
ACX is basically Amazon's and Audible audiobook creation exchange, where people can have their books up there and people can audition to turn them into audiobooks. What's so incredible, as you know, Cheryl, that the audiobook business has been expanding in double digits for a number of years. There is so much demand for audio books that those of us who are getting involved in it are not finding it all that difficult to get work. Now, there are some great audiobook narrators out there, like Scott Brick and Hillary Huber and others, that to learn and hear those folks work and learn from them, it's phenomenal. But there's such a demand for audio that the Audiobook Creation Exchange is out there and makes it possible for a lot of people to get involved in audiobooks that might never have had the opportunity before.
And so Audiobook Creation Exchange. And I'll add to the list of people that you mentioned that Lily and Rachel, and she's been on my show as well. She is
Oh, yes, of
just
course.
got a delicious British accent, and she's done some wonderful, not only audiobooks, but she's done some live theater that has gone to tape. I'm dating myself too, Rob.
Just don't say kinescope.
So you say that you thought you would hate, or you initially did hate the thought of sitting in your booth and reciting or narrating audiobooks. What was your initial hesitation to do so?
Because it was such long-form stuff and having to learn characterizations and be consistent with those throughout a 350 or 400-page book that could be, in terms of when it's all said and done, a 10 to 11 hour, even longer book than that. It takes a lot of work, and it's been said that you got to work your ass off to make six figures as an audiobook narrator. I think that's accurate because there are ways to do it in other genres of voiceover, be it e-learning or be it commercial or promo or corporate narration or whatever it has to be, or even telephone stuff, IVR, interactive voice response. Those things can make more money over the short haul. But in terms of commercial work, my voice is just a little on the old side for most commercial work where they're looking for a millennial. I'm too old for it. So
are we going to go there? We could go there. Well,
I have no problem saying I'm 74 because I can still get by with 40 if I have to. But I find it very rewarding to sit here and give voice to an author's work and have that author say, that's what I didn't even think of it that way. That's better than I even thought of it. And so some people do it for the fame. I think I'm doing it for the same reason I do my announcing in the air show business. I do it to inspire, educate, and entertain the audience. In terms of audiobooks, I want to give life to their words, especially when they are good books and well-written and exciting thrillers and have, in some cases, technical aspects that I can speak to. And because I'm educated, because I have an understanding of those technical aspects, the read is more authentic. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you said inspire, entertain, and educate. And as far as I'm concerned, for a commercial read, you have a warm sound to your voice. It's like getting a comforting hug. And I think we've touched on this before, and it's okay to say, because whether you're in voiceover or you are a consumer of audio content, traditionally you will hear an older man do things that you would not hear an older woman doing. I think it's changing. But you still don't hear a lot of older female voices where you would an older man.
Thanks.
So I wonder, do you rely on a particular faith to help you through this time in your life, or any other time in your life for that matter?
Yeah. Some people call me a Christian. I say I'm a Christ follower, a believer, whatever. That's my rock. Jesus is my rock. And although I don't understand God a lot, because in the course of back in 2006 to 2008, in the course of 28 months, I lost a brother, a wife, and a daughter. And so did it change my faith? Yeah, a little bit. But the option for me is to not have faith, or to have faith in spite of what I don't understand. And that's kind of what it's like. Cheryl, I kind of equate it to the idea of lift in an airplane. There are airplanes out there that weigh 1 million and more pounds, and yet they are able to be lifted into the air with enough power, and yet the air is strong enough, but it's transparent. You can see for thousands of miles through the air. Do we operate on faith? Boy, I operate on faith every time I push the throttle forward and then ease back on the stick to take off. There's an element of faith there that the engine's going to work, that the airplane is going to be lifted up, because that's what nature, the universe, God created. There is such order in the midst of the chaos that we create here on Earth as human beings. There's still a lot of order in the earth, in the world, and in the universe. And we don't know. I think I look back on my life when I was a younger Christian thinking I knew it all. I was a pretty arrogant Christian, and I hope I'm not now. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I really appreciate that you'd be willing to share that, because to share your loss in such a short period of time, that would test anyone's resolve and faith. And I hear about your life. It sounds very blessed to me, certainly not without hard work. And when we hear of someone's blessings, or as other people refer to as luck, they think, oh, they're without blemish or they're without heartache, when in fact, more times than not, be farther from the truth. And I knew a little bit about your losses, and yet you still have such a joy and hunger for life. You shared your age. That's another fallacy that people think, oh, you get old and you just sit in a rocking chair and knit, when in fact there's so much to life and so much to learn. And the way you've transitioned into the career that you have now is very exciting. And I asked you that because I wanted to know how you've, pardon the pun, navigated the transitions. And certainly coming out of the pandemic, it's not over, but coming out of the pandemic, a lot of people have looked within. They've looked to their faith. They've looked to skill sets to help pull them through. And so in addition to your faith, what makes you hopeful?
Well, here's something that my oldest son, Robbie, is 47 years old now. And he said to me one time that he had told people that, he said, my dad has reinvented himself 3 times. I owned an audio business for a while. I did the television thing for a while. I worked at a church. I was a singer and did singing for different corporate events as well as church events and stuff like that. I became an air show announcer. And as you get older, you may not physically be able to do as much, but wisdom does not have to go away with age.
Amen.
And that came from a pastor friend of mine. He said, you can get older, but you can still get wiser. You can still increase your knowledge. And when I think of voice actors who are still working in their 80s, there's a guy named George Goodall who still works, who still records. And I'm 74. If I can be working when I'm 83 years old like he is, or 84 years old like he is, I've got a long way to go. And success, you talk about being blessed, but success for me in the airshow business, it took, from the time I joined the International Council of AirShows, it took me 11 years to have the nerve to walk away from my church job when my wife was in remission with cancer, to take a chance at the airshow business. And what it did for my wife and me was give us the last year and a half of her life. It gave us an opportunity of being together in a way that we would not have been together otherwise. So all of this, the reinvention, the tragedies, the heartbreaks, there are gonna be trials, there are gonna be tribulations, they're gonna be very, very rough spots. But yet 5 years after my wife passed away, I was able to remarry. I met a lady who my wife knew and who my daughter, who passed away, she babysat for Jill's kids. And so the blending of families, when a friend of mine at church played Cupid with Jill and me, I mean, how often do you get a second chance like I've gotten? And I don't know what that is for other people, but I know what a blessing it's been for me. Now, is that a God thing? Yeah, I think it was. Is it the universe? Maybe some people want to call it that. But I got a second chance at love that I didn't know that I would have. And so it's been pretty remarkable for Jill and me to have these years as we've had for the last 10 years. We've been married. It'll be 11 years in January that we've been married. That's been good too.
Congratulations on that. You touched upon, is it a blessing? Well, please understand when I say that, there's also a whole lot of hard work that goes behind that, perseverance when other people may have given up. Like you said, your faith being tested at a time when you had so much loss back to back to back. And how do you get up in the morning? Well, weeping may come at night, but joy comes in the morning. And you chose to hold on to that joy. Speaking of which, I have a couple more questions. What does bring you joy?
Oh boy. I think there are so many parts of my family that bring me joy. To see my kids doing so well in what they've chosen. 2 of them, my boys, are working at churches. The biggest church in this part of the country, Crossroads Community Church, I think they were the 3rd fastest growing church in the country for a while. My daughter, Abby, is a PhD up in Illinois, and I have another daughter who's a web designer who was our problem child, who is now doing exceptionally well and living like a queen in Bali, Indonesia, because she loves it there. And she does web work all over the world. So I see joy in family. I see joy in being able to work with people and on projects that are gratifying. And I come out of my studio. After I finish a chapter or two, I'll come out of my studio and walk around to do my editing pass, my first pass. And I'm just smiling. I said, how is it that I can be 74 and doing this? I have basically a professional recording studio here, and I'm doing professional work. What's not to love?
Exactly. Well, Rob Reider, my final question to you is, if there was a soundtrack to your life, what would be on it?
I've heard you ask that question, and I started to formulate it. But it might be the song Smile. Though your heart is breaking, smile, even though it's aching. There is something about a smile that transcends anything else. I don't give a flying rip whether somebody's black, green, blue, gay, straight, or whatever. But if that person's willing to smile and return a smile, that breaks down walls. And that builds unity that otherwise doesn't happen. And I think part of that comes from my working with so many in the military, that nobody cares with the people that I work with what color or what gender they are, if they can do the job. And the other thing that would be part of the soundtrack is lifting somebody up, reach out and touch those people who serve in restaurants, those people who serve as plumbers, those people who serve as electricians, those people who serve on a production line. They are no less important than the artists that we like to associate with, that we think are so creative and so important. I had a musicology professor at the university at CCM in Cincinnati who said, the artist, the musician, is no more important than a plumber. And I think we discussed this briefly. That if you've got a toilet that overflows, nobody cares if I can do a Spanish accent.
Right. They're not going to call a violinist or the first chair.
So what are you going to play? Handel's water music, whatever.
Perfect. But if there's anything these past couple of years have taught us, that the frontline workers, all of the people that maybe other people didn't pay attention to, and now we realize, wow, when they're not there, there's a big void. And if someone doesn't have a smile, give them one of yours, because you never, ever know what someone is showing up to work with that day.
You bet. You are so right about that, Cheryl. You never know. And when we all get it in our heads that we're no better than anybody else, I will tell you this. I had my son Robbie, and he brought this up to me years later, and I didn't even remember it. But he brought it up and said that we were loading in a sound system to a hotel in Detroit, Michigan, and it was bitterly cold. And somehow I said something nice to or treated one of the guys who worked on the loading dock at that hotel well. And he ended up making things easier for us the rest of the weekend. And I didn't even realize it. And my son said, "That's what you did, Dad. Make somebody feel valued and counted." I try to do that all the time. I find myself walking down the street smiling just because I'm walking. And there are
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And I think of all the people in the voice business, and I mentioned Jim Edgar, who's a technical wizard, and so is George Whittam, and so is Dan Leonard, and some others who are so good at what they do and who are so generous with their learning to help people do better, get better, and whether it be from technical, for performance, whatever it happens to be, there's a lot of giving that goes on in that business. And I find that in the aviation business as well. So that's a cool thing that goes on for people who could be competitors who are still willing to give and share. And in many cases, not get remunerated for it.
I find when people really, and think about it, if every single person on the earth was doing what they were created to do, how much more peace and love there would be. And I think that generosity comes from an awareness of the abundance of how, like you said, you get to go in your booth and come out and realize you did something for a couple of hours or even a couple of weeks that you absolutely have a passion for. And then the end user, listener, if you will, is going to benefit from that, whether it's escaping in a beautiful fiction or be helped because they listen to a book on medical narration to help them with something that they're dealing with. And I think that is such a gift when we are walking in how God created us to be. So I'm smiling over here, Rob Reider.
Good.
I thank you so much for your time. Very, very much. And I will have all the ways people could get a hold of you.
Thank you.
And if they want to hire you, if they want to purchase your audiobooks, if they just want to get in touch with you and say, hey, I enjoyed your episode, or I've heard you on an air show, or I remember you from your days of television, whatever it is.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm so in love with the power of podcasting and how it's brought people together. And it brought us together, brought you here with me today. And for that, I am very grateful.
I am too, Cheryl. Thank you so very, very much for the time. This has been delightful.
You're welcome. Thank you. I'd also like to thank the following news outlets for the use of their clips in so aptly painting the picture of the fear that we're facing during this pandemic: BBC, PBS, Now This, UNESCO, and Some Good News. I especially want to thank Joel and Luke Smallbone, otherwise known as the Group for King and Country, for allowing me to use an excerpt of their song Together, which could not be a more hopeful and inspiring song for such a time as this. Finally, I'll leave you with the following from Proverbs 23:18. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Thank you again for joining me today. Feel free to offer feedback or a story idea at 19stories@soundsatchelstudios.com, via Instagram at Cheryl HollingVO. I look forward to sharing more stories on the next episode of 19 Stories From Fear to Hope. Until then, stay healthy and hopeful.
Together with our differences, together we are bolder, braver, stronger.